This program, of course, is presented by Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the most widely read, widely sold, and respected wrestling magazine in the world today.
This is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer Al Castle. Going to be joined in just a few moments by my co-host Brian Solomon for what was a very spirited conversation. I think you'll agree. We covered a lot of topics on what's been a very busy week in wrestling. And then the conversation gets really interesting because we talk Ultimate Warrior. I wasn't expecting to have this conversation, but following our last episode where we talked a bit about the Vice documentaries, Dark Side of the Ring, and also the A&E biographies that they've been doing, we both got a chance to see the Ultimate Warrior ones that they both put out in the same week and talk about them. In what I think is a fun debate. I mean, it got, I don't want to say it was heated, but it got contentious enough that there was some text exchanged after we recorded it just to make sure we're cool. And absolutely, of course, we are. I joked with Brian that I'll have a new co-host for the next episode, but no, love Brian and appreciate his opinion, even if it's not always the same as mine. So, stay tuned for that, and I know I'm totally burying the lead after my conversation with Brian. You'll hear a part of my conversation with the AEW World Heavyweight Champion, Kenny Omega. I teased that I had a big guest interview lined up for the current issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated, the Hot Seat interview, and it is Kenny Omega, and you'll get a chance to hear a portion of the audio here on this episode after my conversation with Brian. Stay tuned for that. Kenny always has a whole lot to say about his career, about AEW, about this new role that he's been playing over the last year or so, working with other companies. So very newsworthy. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned for that. Also, you do not want to miss the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. It is the August 2021 issue, and Kenny is on the cover, along with Bobby Lashley, Lio Rush, and Maki Ito, who are all featured in interview features here inside the magazine. Great artwork on the cover, too, of those 4 stars. And tons more in this issue. It's not one that you want to miss. Let me go through the table of contents. We're calling this our Summer 2021 special. And as I mentioned, interviews with some of the top stars in the company. A look back on wrestling and COVID 1 year later, and how pro wrestling was changed by the COVID pandemic. Features on what else? As I mentioned, Lio Rush, Maki Ito, Bobby Lashley. We have got a feature on NXT Heritage Cup winner A-Kid, on RJ City. A really interesting story that was put together about accessibility for people with disabilities at pro wrestling shows. I think it's a real important story, one I was happy to kind of consult on, I guess I'd say. But it was Ashley Morris that put the story together, and she did a fantastic job on a really important story. So tons in this issue. You don't want to miss it. Place to go is pwi-online.com. As I always say, you could pick up just the one issue, download it right away to your computer, your phone, your tablet, what have you. Or the way to go, I say, is subscribe, whether you're subscribing to the digital edition or to the print edition, have it mailed right to your home. You'll save up to half off the cover price. So it's absolutely the way to go. Either way, it's pwi-online.com. Also, Father's Day is coming up. For that wrestling fan in your life, why don't you pick them up a Pro Wrestling Illustrated t-shirt? And there are many to pick from both at ProWrestlingTees.com and WhatAmaneuver.net. Both have exclusive lines of PWI t-shirts, and not just PWI. We've got Matt Brock shirts, we've got PWI 500 shirts, we've got shirts with some of the titles of our defunct magazines like The Wrestler and Inside Wrestling, and tons more. You can even get a onesie for a baby with the PWI logo on it. So tons of stuff, different colors, really a lot to choose from. Go to, again, ProWrestlingTees.com or WhatAmaneuver.net to pick up yours. Also, please follow us on social media at Official PWI, both on Instagram and Facebook. We're also on YouTube. And you can also reach us by email at pwipodcast@outlook.com or pwi@capopublishing.com. So let's talk about the latest round of releases. I guess there are about a half dozen. The big notable names: Braun Strowman, Aleister Black, somewhat of a lesser extent, Lana, Buddy Murphy, Santana Garrett. Am I missing anybody else?
I think that was it, at least as far as I know. And there were corporate ones too.
Right. So Braun Strowman, obviously being the biggest name, and a little bit lesser extent, Aleister Black. I'll give my thoughts in a minute. I mean, to me, unexpected, but maybe not completely without logic, and I might have a little bit of a different view than some folks. But let me get your take on all those names being let go. Is WWE making a mistake here, or do you think that this made some sense?
Well, it's unexpected for sure, and I think the dead giveaway there is, I mean, they clearly had plans for Aleister Black, sure. And they were doing all these
closing angles a week earlier,
right? He talked about having all new music he was going to use and everything recently. So this clearly was a spur of the moment thing. I mean, has to be a very quick decision. As far as, I think, look, this is not any kind of like earth-shattering take here, but the biggest missed opportunity was Strowman. And look, he's not going to be the second coming of Ric Flair or anything, but he doesn't need to be. But at a certain point in time, they had on their hands the potential of, in my opinion, a new face of the company, a 7-foot tall Stone Cold Steve Austin. I mean, he was getting over in a big, big way, and they just killed it. It's almost like it's one of those things we talk about where someone's organically getting over, and because it's not in their plans, they don't like it. They missed the boat with him. I don't even know if he was completely salvageable at this point, but they missed the boat years ago. I still wouldn't have let him go. That one and Black are the ones that really don't make sense to me. Lana, I almost feel like with Miro being gone, it was just a matter of time, and I think clearly, I mean, she's the no-brainer of where she's going to wind up, but that's the one that got me is Strowman especially. I feel like, man, what a waste. You look at the effort and the work that they put into these people, and you think, like, what is the point? Why are they doing this? And these are corporate decisions, and a lot of times corporate decisions from the outside don't make sense. And so I don't think these kind of things are not the way they would be operating, let's say, 20, 25 years ago, let's say public company, the pre-ultra corporatization of the company. These are not wrestling company decisions. These are corporate decisions. And so that's why I think sometimes it's so baffling.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, so often with wrestlers, it's just a matter of timing. And while, the Braun Strowman that they had now, I could see them looking at the guy, what his salary is, and I guess the word is that by WWE standards, it was up there. So they'd be freeing up a fair amount of cash by letting him go. But beyond that, just kind of having that feeling of, look, we've done all we can do with this guy. And I don't know that they're wrong in thinking that right now with this Braun Strowman that they have. But I think what you touched on is that, there was a window there, and it was just a matter of timing, and they missed it. I mean, I think back, basically you're talking about when he had that main event program with Brock Lesnar a couple of years ago. And that was when you had to strike. And they didn't. He cooled off considerably right after that. Like it built up to this crescendo. And I get, why they made the call at the time. This wasn't the kind of situation, I think, where it was the most idiotic move in the world not to give him the title. It was a judgment call. Some of this is, hindsight being 2020.
But again, he clearly cooled off right after that, and then some of the moves they made subsequently, including putting the Universal title on him at WrestleMania, you'd think that in and of itself is career making. That shows their confidence in you, and you're coronated. But you remember how they did that. I mean, he was an 11th hour replacement who I'm not sure was even on the show otherwise, right? And that was Roman Reigns' spot, right? Roman was supposed to work with Goldberg at WrestleMania last year, and I think the story was that, Strowman was driving down to his ranch somewhere and was about to pull up and gets the call, we need you to replace Roman Reigns at WrestleMania, and heads back. That's not exactly the biggest vote of confidence for a wrestler. And past that, I do think, like, I look at him now and I'm not sure what you do with him. And I also think with a guy like him, and I'm reminded of Drew McIntyre years ago, this isn't necessarily the end. He's still, I don't know how old he is. I think he's in mid-30s, but a guy who I don't think has that many miles on him. I mean, he could do this for another 10 years. I could see them kind of putting him on ice for a while. And sometimes WWE does it almost selfishly and kind of hands off the responsibility of making a star to other wrestling promoters, and then the free agent that is available in a few years is a much bigger version of that star than the one you let go. And again, I'm thinking of Drew McIntyre, who when they let him go, he was a bottom of the tier 3MB member, and they got back a potential main event star. So I could see them doing something like that. The thing is, I think with Strowman in particular, it's kind of hard to figure out where he lands, right? I mean, everybody now thinks with all these people, AEW, and I think some are better fits than others there. But I very much not convinced that they'll even be interested, and if they are interested, that the reaction would be a good one from fans. What do you think about that match, AEW and Braun Strowman, or Adam Scherr, I guess, or whatever they'd call him?
Right. I think that he would actually work there. I really do. Well, I think it's interesting first to start with. I mean, people have talked about how he sort of arrogantly and kind of without any kind of foresight, he made this comment on Twitter at the beginning of the pandemic that he would never work for anybody else but WWE. Because he was criticizing indie wrestlers, for complaining about how they didn't have any work or whatever. And he was sort of punching down and speaking from this place of power. Here he is, like one of the top guys in WWE. So he made this big public claim that he was only ever going to work for Vince McMahon. And once he left WWE, he was done. Now, I don't believe for a minute or a fraction of a minute that he's actually going to follow through on that vow. So that said, I do think he would. I almost think that maybe in the beginning they might be hesitant to bring him in there, but I think that would be a bad decision on their part, because I think especially in a company like that, boy, would he stand out. I mean, that's a company that's known, whether fairly or not, it's known for being kind of a junior heavyweight company, right? And I think a guy like that showing up there and being really dominant would make a huge splash. I think he'd do really well. I mean, whether they do that or not, I don't know, but I think he really would. Look, he may not be one of the top WWE guys, but as crazy as it sounds, I mean, he'd be. I mean, I'm hard pressed to think about is a very small handful of names to jump over that would have been bigger, like Moxley and Jericho, obviously. But I mean, he'd be one of probably the biggest gets that they have gotten if they brought him over.
Yeah, he's a top tier WWE guy, but he just came off of main eventing their last pay-per-view. He'd absolutely be in the top 5 baby faces for sure in the company before he was released. But I think he is so equated with WWE. He is so much like the WWE product, right? And so much so that when they brought him in, there was a lot of I think backlash against him because he was so green, and it was kind of like that old Vince mentality of look at the size of this guy, and that's why they got behind him so much. And I could see and I don't mean this sort of a derogatory way, but the hipster AEW fan, I think is going to reject Braun Strowman in WWE, especially because he would dwarf everybody, including guys like Wardlow, right? Who is their monster? That's their big guy. He comes in here, or Lance Archer, and is considerably bigger than all those guys. And I don't know that they want that. So of all the releases, I think that, I think it might be a little hard for him to find a place to land.
Well, these are also fans that seem to believe that, no one should ever go from one wrestling company to another. These are people who are not watching wrestling before 2001 is the only thing that I could surmise. Right. They have this thing of like, well, you're a WWE guy or you're an AEW guy. Like, no, this is a business, or if you want to call it, this is the sport of pro wrestling. That's like saying a baseball player could never leave, the team that he starts on. I mean, it's ridiculous. And as far as the Strowman thing of like, he caught heat because he leapfrogged right over NXT and he went right to the main roster. Right. And I feel like, honestly, I think they should do that more often than they do, because for a lot of people, there are some people that I think it really benefits them and they build momentum. But for some people, I think it actually stalls their momentum where they come in and it's like, oh, I know this guy already. Or like it almost gives, and I know, NXT has come a long way. It's not really developmental anymore, but it still sometimes gives that vibe of this guy is like a rookie or a scrub, or like, oh yeah, he's like working his way up. Where what you really want is a guy who just makes a huge impact right out of the gate. And sometimes that's hard to do if fans have been seeing them for months or longer in NXT.
But I think that led to even more resentment towards him because he got that treatment when so many other wrestlers with so much more experience, including guys like Nakamura and Johnny Gargano and Drew McIntyre when he came back, did not come right back to the main roster. Yeah. The message there is that you guys all need work, but this guy is ready for prime time. And to his credit, Strowman really came through and really developed a lot over the last, whatever it's been, 4 or 5 years. I remember, he was one of those guys who was almost unwatchable when he started. And again, that's no slight on him. He had very, very little experience. And a few years in, was having some really fun matches. It seemed to know his character really well. And for a certain kind of match and promo, I thought he worked really well. I remember being in Nassau Coliseum when he did that angle with Roman Reigns, where he stretchered him out, and then he went backstage and knocked down the stretcher, and then they put him back in the ambulance, and I think he tipped over the ambulance and pulled out the stretcher and knocked it down again, and the crowd was going crazy. They loved it, so they were absolutely onto something. Do you think he worked better as a babyface or a heel?
Oh boy, I think in the beginning he was definitely better as a heel, just because it was hard for somebody who was that green to kind of get over, I think, as a top face. But once he got over as a face, you really got the feeling that that's where he was meant to be. Like people, once he got better and he really got some steam going, people really wanted to get behind him. And I think that was where he was at his best eventually.
Yeah, I agree. I think he was a fine babyface. Let's talk a little bit about Aleister Black. It feels like sort of universally fans are, I don't want to say more supportive or puzzled, but he's a guy that I think had fewer detractors in some ways than Braun Strowman, and more than Strowman, the one that fans say, oh, WWE really kind of missed the boat with him, because Strowman had his run and Aleister never really got started. He had a run in NXT with the title, but they just always seemed a little kind of fully committed with the guy on TV. How much of a missed opportunity was he, and what do you think is a good fit for him now going forward?
He's the latest example of the thing we just keep seeing, where somebody is a phenom in NXT, they're over, they're strong, they've got all this potential, they come to the roster, they fizzle out, they don't know what to do with them. He's the latest one of that. You think back to where he was at and where he's at now, that shouldn't happen. That's dysfunctional. Like it should be the opposite. We should be looking back at what he did in NXT and going like, wow, that was nothing compared to what he's doing now. Like the fact that he went backwards is speaking to something really broken in this system. Something is broken. And then you had Booker T. I don't know if you saw like his comments about how, well, he was never really a star and this guy was never really going to get over. There was nothing that special about him. And I don't know. I don't know what he was watching. I really don't. That is baffling to me because he definitely was a star, still is a star. As far as where he could go, I mean, God, I think he could. I think he could write his own ticket. I mean, I might like to see him in Japan. Like a big, strong guy like that with a dark gimmick like that. I think would do well in New Japan.
Yeah. What if I told you I kind of agreed with Booker T?
Oh, I'll get out of here, man.
I've got to say, I was. I mean, I think the guy is very good at what he does, and clearly super talented. I don't know that I ever totally bought it. I disagree that he was ever that over in NXT. I remember when he won the title, and it was coming off a string of champions where it really felt like this guy was the next guy. And with him, I think the fans were like, really him? They were not fully committed. And I don't know. I never saw him do anything that really jumped off the page to that next level. And I gotta say that the whole act always felt a little kind of put on for me, a little indie-rific.
With reference to that, I get what you're saying about the indie-rific thing. So here's what I'll offer to counter that. I think he is, and this is not a knock on him, I think he may have been a guy who would have been better served to remain in NXT. I think he was very suited to that audience. I think it was a gimmick that didn't really translate to the main roster and the more kind of like casual audience. He really worked well for that hardcore fan, those kind of like, they eat that sort of stuff up. Like you said, it is a very like almost like Ring of Honor-ish kind of, feel to him. But so I think maybe NXT, and that's not a knock on him because there's a lot of great things happening there, but not everybody maybe is cut out for that main roster crossover. So maybe if he had stayed there and been the big fish down there, that might have been what worked best for him. Who knows?
Yeah, I got to say, with pretty much everybody that would be let go, and I'm not saying they should have, and in fact, I don't think they should have in a lot of these cases, including with Aleister Black. I mean, a lot of it, I just heard somebody saying this, actually Bruce Pritchard of all people on an old podcast, and he said, like, the way to get somebody over as a main event star is to put them in the main event. And that's so simple but true. So we can come up, as apparently they have, with excuses all day about their shortcomings. But the reality is, with any of these guys, Black included, you push them to the moon, and maybe it doesn't catch on, but you'll never know unless you do it. But all that said, with this whole list of people they let go, I think in all the cases there was something missing. An ingredient, and I haven't thought about that with all the releases. I mean, I didn't think it was Andrade. I think of and there's some news with him, obviously, too, when they let him go, and I'm glad they did because he wanted out and they didn't want anything to do with him. But I saw them as missing the boat huge with Andrade. I don't see that with almost anybody here. Strowman, as we talked about, I think once upon a time, there was a window for him to be something really special. I think that time passed. Maybe you can get it back, but I think he's needs some serious kind of image rehabilitation that's not going to happen in WWE anytime soon. But the rest of these people, including Buddy Murphy, who, very good in the ring when they gave a damn about their cruiserweight division. I thought he was a fine champion there. But again, I never saw anything that really screamed out, "Oh, this guy is a main eventer waiting to happen." Lana doesn't work without a Rusev, or maybe better said, she doesn't really work as a wrestler. So Santana Garrett, in some ways it's really a different situation. In her case, they just sort of cut bait early. We'll see in a couple of years. Still young in her career, but. All these folks. I mean, do you think AEW should just go and kind of grab everyone? And asking that in the context of everybody they've picked up already, and we've talked about this a little bit, and having to be careful of kind of becoming what TNA Impact was some years ago, where you're just kind of like the land of the cast-offs, and it almost seems like every week you see another former WWE star popping up in WWE, in AEW, including some folks that I don't know who are the best fits. Andrade showed up last week, and I think that's a terrific signing. But the visual of Tony Schiavone interviewing Mark Henry, and then Vicky Guerrero comes out to introduce Andrade. It felt I don't know. It was almost comical in how much they were kind of embracing these former WWE stars.
Right. Well, there's a difference, because you don't want to just be perceived as taking the people that WWE doesn't want. That's true. I think where you might see a little change, and maybe Andrade is sort of the first example of this, in sort of, kind of, where you may have talents who actually want to go to AEW, who say, I don't want to be here anymore, get me out of my contract, or, and they choose to go there. I think that's a very, very different thing, because like I said, nobody's going to stay in one company, or 99% of people, for their whole career. So just like no one is going to say if a bunch of AEW guys show up in WWE, no one's going to say, oh, WWE is becoming the AEW cast-off company, right? No one's going to say that, because there's a perception of that's where you want to be, WWE. So if you start getting guys that are actually choosing to go to AEW and prefer to work there, that changes the dynamic a little bit, I think. That makes it look like more of a, we're competing for the same talent pool rather than we're just taking whatever falls off the table. That's a big difference.
Yeah. But with every person that they pick up, even if they are guys with good reputations who maybe have the thought on them is WWE didn't use them to their maximum ability, that's at least theoretically less payroll for other people coming up. So I would think, right, whether it's Mark Henry or Andrade, or if they decide to pick up any of these folks, Braun Strowman or Aleister Black, and you throw in there Paul White recently. And granted, some of these guys have, these aren't just wrestlers. They have other roles, but that's all payroll. And, I think that there's at least also the potential of maybe causing some morale issues when, assuming that these guys are all getting a pretty nice paycheck. And in a lot of these cases, leaving contract opportunities in WWE to go to AEW, I think tells you that they're making more over there. And I don't know. If you're insert any kind of like AEW original, for lack of a better word, who I can't imagine is making that kind of money. Christian's another one, right? So they've done this a lot lately. So bigger picture, there's some folks and rumors going around that this is all gearing up for a potential sale of WWE. First, do you buy that?
Well, I heard an interesting conspiracy theory, which I'm not sure I give credence to, but it popped up a couple of times that Vince is, choosing these guys that he really doesn't have huge plans for or care too much about, but they're making a lot of money. He's letting them go on purpose so they become AEW's problem, for the reason that you're describing. So then AEW starts spreading themselves too thin and paying too much money. So it's like he's trying to sabotage them in some way. I think that's a little too out there but it is kind of brilliant if it was true, but I don't know. I doubt it. But as far as the sale thing, I've been saying for years, I've been one of these people, and everybody, say, oh, that'll never happen. I used to say it when I worked there, that this company, especially as Vince starts to really age out and not be as involved. Like, I don't think this is something that young Vince would have ever done, ever. Sell wouldn't have happened ever. But I sort of felt that that's where this was all going as Vince got older, as Stephanie and Triple H got more of a hold on things, that because this is the way now of all kind of entertainment media in this country or in the world. Like that seems to be, not that I'm a big fan of that. I'm not. I think eventually these big media companies are going to get busted up like Bell Telephone. But that's still a long way off, but that's the way things are going. So I feel, when I heard people suspecting that based on these weird releases and these other budget cutting measures at a time when the company is hugely profitable, it did raise those red flags for me. And since I already was thinking in my head, it's just a matter of time before, Disney, NBC Universal, whoever is going to come calling, or Fox, or well, actually Fox not anymore because they sold all their media stuff to Disney, but somebody was going to come calling. It just seemed like a matter of time. It seems to be the move where the McMahons will still be, at least temporarily, running the show, for these corporate overlords. And the sale of the network, or the rental, whatever you want to call it, of the network footage to Peacock would seem to make, NBC Universal or Comcast the leading, candidate in these sales. I could easily see that happening, very easily see that happening now, the way things are. I wouldn't be surprised in the least.
Yeah, I kind of agree. Similarly, a couple of years ago, you don't even have to go back to young Vince McMahon, but just a few years ago, I would have thought it unthinkable. But stuff like the Peacock move, where they are relinquishing some of that grip and that control, and we've talked about a Peacock censoring some WWE content and having more influence and more of a hand in what's out there. That's the kind of thing that I would have thought Vince McMahon would have never allowed. So, like you touched on, getting up there in years, maybe ready to cash out, seeing that there's an opportunity in the window here that may not be here again, and if there's a way to kind of maintain control, but also cash out, I could see that happening. You think NBC is the best fit for that?
I don't know about the best fit. I just think it's the most likely, just because of, they air Raw, and they've got, all the network footage now. As far as the best fit, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say who the best fit is, but I can tell you for sure the worst fit would be Disney. Now, obviously, we all know. I mean, Disney is
why that they would want it. I mean, why would they want that? I get that it's a huge brand, but so much of it runs counter to everything that they do, unless they're oblivious about it and all they know is that, some kids like Roman Reigns and they sell a lot of action figures and
but they would
characters. I see that part of it, but there's so much else that I just can't imagine kind of fits in their portfolio.
Right, and that's not even saying, it's not like, we all know Disney isn't just Mickey Mouse and and Snow White. I mean,
right, there's Marvel, ESPN, all that stuff.
They have Star Wars. They have things, but WWE is a whole different animal. There's just that product is of a different kind of nature, like you said, than anything that they have, and I think it would just come off really strange. And I do think there would be probably, if it did happen, a huge amount of censorship to the point where it would change completely what the company was. And I just think all parties would probably have to walk away from a bargaining table in a situation like that. I wouldn't see. The other ones, yeah, I mean, I could see anything happening. I mean, Fox, like I kind of corrected myself before, but Fox does air SmackDown, and they have paid WWE a lot of money. They do a lot of sports and sports type stuff, so they could possibly be a fit, and Raw and SmackDown. I mean, SmackDown's already on Fox, so I mean, they're a possibility too, I would think. I just feel like it's not just that NBC Universal feels like the best fit. I actually think that it's very possible that what we have seen is the beginning of that happening. This Peacock thing is the beginning of a kind of a transition, and there may be things going on behind the scenes that we're not even privy to. I just had a reunion 2 or 3 days ago with a bunch of former WWE, former and current WWE employees, people I used to work with.
Cool.
And I was so tempted to be that guy who tries to pick people's brains, like, hey, what'd you hear about this sale thing? How, what's going on with Peacock? I just didn't want to be that guy, because then I would never get invited to these things again. But I was so tempted to try to, because I feel like people know things more than what we know. Things are going to come to light.
Yeah. The other, I mean, in the category of things you never thought you would see in WWE. The other thing going on over there is rumors, and maybe it's more than that at this point, of some kind of working relationship with New Japan Pro Wrestling. And for years now, that seems to be the relationship that American wrestling promotions all kind of covet. Ring of Honor had it, and I don't know if it's still there. I don't think it's there in any kind of, big, a significant kind of way right now. But AEW and many other promotions have wanted that because they are the number two. We talk about AEW number two United States, but New Japan is legit number two in the world and has been for a long time, and has legit stars and a legit huge audience and some of the best workers in the world. I couldn't have predicted. I mean, maybe I should have. I don't know why I would discount it outright, but I just never thought of WWE being that company. What do you think about that? Do you think it makes sense on either or both ends, and what could this manifest in?
I think it almost feels a little reactionary, like they're like, why now? It feels like they may be trying to take away something specifically because it's something that AEW has, and if you think about it, of all the companies, I would tend to think that AEW right now is co-promoting with, the one with the biggest cachet and the biggest kind of upside is New Japan. And that's nothing against the other companies, but New Japan has this global reputation. It's really seen as one of the world's, pardon the expression, elite wrestling companies. And I think probably of all, even though you've got Omega with the Impact title and everything right now, I think of all the relationships they have, prestige-wise at least, losing the New Japan one would be the biggest blow to them. And I think that's a big motivator behind this. People have also talked about how this is sort of like the influence of Daniel Bryan, because he doesn't want to. It's a way of trying to keep him happy and keep him around. I think you're giving Daniel Bryan way too much credit if you think that they're making a decision based on something like that. That it would make Daniel Bryan happy. I frankly don't think that is going to influence Vince McMahon's mind very much. But I tend to think it's more the AEW spoiler move.
Yeah. I think it's really smart, though. I mean, it's kind of hard to imagine in some ways the two coexisting, because in some ways they represent complete opposite presentations of professional wrestling. And New Japan and AEW, much less so. I mean, they're clearly more on the same page. I mean, we saw Yuji Nagata open up Dynamite a few weeks ago, and it was a match that could have fit in on Dynamite as easily as on a New Japan card, which is to say that there's a very similar kind of presentation. And with WWE, they're sports entertainment. That said, I think it's really smart. I think it'll give WWE some credibility among a certain kind of fan. And I think the other thing is that for as you touched on, that all that reputation that New Japan has for being elite pro wrestling, I think historically and culturally, they do look to the West as that is such a huge market, and they want to be part of the major leagues in pro wrestling. And I think there's always been a respect and kind of a deference for not just American wrestling, but WWE.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Going back to when they jumped at taking Brock Lesnar or Kurt Angle, they see these as the biggest stars in the world, and I think the brain trust in New Japan sees the opportunity to work with Roman Reigns or these top stars, and I think they're really excited about it. I the idea of featuring New Japan talent at WrestleMania, I think they'd be all over it, and I think it very much could be a mutually beneficial relationship.
Right, and I think like you said, there is that recognition in Japan that America is where the professional wrestling form, whatever you want to call it, originated. It grew. It didn't hit Japan until the 50s, and that's where it came from. And there's still very much that link. And there's always been that fascination with American stars there. We know that. And honestly, I mean, I know it's ancient history, but New Japan did have a working relationship
for many years.
WWF back in the day, from about 10 years, from like the mid 70s to the mid 80s, they had a very healthy working relationship. I do think times have changed a lot and the products have changed, obviously, for both companies. I wouldn't be surprised if this becomes, if it goes through and if there is interaction, that it becomes a thing where New Japan's main contact point is NXT. Because I think that would work like gangbusters, like almost like oh man, what's the name of the faction? I'm drawing a blank here. The Bullet Club.
Yeah,
an invasion of NXT by something like that. That would be huge. That would be big. Like we were talking about Aleister Black and how some things don't translate. I think that would have a much bigger impact with the NXT crowd and on the NXT show. A lot of those people who do follow New Japan closely more than the average, like teenager or whoever who's watching Raw on a Monday night that doesn't even maybe know that New Japan exists. I think that would be the move to do, would be interact with NXT, but we'll see.
But wouldn't that be an acknowledgement on a New Japan's part that our promotion, our brand, that is held in such high regard, certainly in their country and really around the globe, and packing the Tokyo Dome, as big as we are here, we're the equivalent of WWE's developmental. That's where our stars belong. Because I think you could make, I don't know if it's realistic or not, but I could see them saying, no. If you're taking Okada, you're featuring him at WrestleMania on or near to the top. Our guys are not developmental guys. Our guys are top stars.
I do think that could be seen as a sticking point. I do agree that they may not like that, or they might, but I think from a creative point of view, I think it would yield better results, if that even matters. But I also wouldn't be surprised. I know it sounds crazy. There is a deference to American wrestling and to WWE over there, where I always used to point out the fact that New Japan themselves never referred to the IWGP title as a world title, for instance. They never did on their own, and I still don't think they do, with the reason being that they always felt that the championships in the United States, like the NWA one and the WWF, and that they were a bigger deal. Like they were acknowledging that American wrestling was a bigger deal than Japanese wrestling, and in a weird way, and it's sort of like a humility that I don't think a lot of American wrestling promoters have, that's for sure. But I wouldn't be surprised if even they themselves understood that. I mean, it could go either way, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, and I think another thing that goes to your point is that their talent would just get a better reaction on NXT, right?
Yes.
Because, it's going to be an audience that's more familiar with them. If assuming things were back to normal and Raw was live on a Monday night in Tulsa, and Okada or Shingo or insert your New Japan Pro Wrestling star makes a surprise appearance, I think that crowd is largely flat. I think they're who's that guy? I've never heard of them. Were in NXT, they would explode, right? I mean, I think of like those takeover Brooklyn crowds that where they debuted so many of these guys like Adam Cole, and the crowds did explode. I don't think they get that reaction from the main roster brands. I mean, it's been a while, but I remember going to house shows in Madison Square Garden just in the last few years, and the average fan there, I'd say, was very, very casual and would not know who any of these people are. So yeah, I mean, it's a matter of whether they're set up for success. How do you envision it the other way? I mean, do you see WWE lending out talent and potentially top talent to appear on New Japan shows? I mean, could you see a Roman Reigns in a featured match at the next Wrestle Kingdom?
I don't think the deal works any other way. I mean, like, if I'm running New Japan, I mean, why would you agree to a deal that doesn't include that? It feels like, I mean, that's the biggest bonus, that you'd be getting these guys to come over there and work. I think absolutely you would see.
But do they give you Akira Tozawa? You send us Okada and we'll send you Akira Tozawa.
Look, I mean, you probably remember what happened in the 90s when there was that company SWS, and they were that they were definitely doing that. They had like dream matches happening over there with like Hulk Hogan teaming up with, I forget who it was, like a huge Japanese star against.
And we got Teru and Kateo in the mid card match at WrestleMania with Demolition. Yeah,
that was happening. Randy Savage was over there and things like that. And I think it really would be something like that. I would love to see stuff like that, and I could totally see that happening. I really could.
Yeah. I wonder how far. I mean, there's been a little reporting on this from, I guess, Dave Meltzer. I'd love to hear something official. And yeah, I mean, that just opens up so many possibilities in terms of exchanging talent. Real quick on keeping on New Japan, we don't talk a lot about them, but there has been a lot of change over there with Will Ospreay giving up the title a few weeks back because of a neck injury. They put it up for grabs, and just I guess last night, early this morning, Shingo beats Okada to become the new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion. Any thoughts on that? I don't know how much you're watching. I remember Shingo from the Dragon Gate USA days, and that's when I saw some of his work. Apparently, by all reports, has only improved since then, and has really come into his own as a world-class guy. Does this feel like a good fit in terms of like creating your next top guy?
I think that creating those top guys is so important. And that's one of the things that they always run the risk of. I mean, any company does, but it even happens over there of just falling on the same small group of guys. And the thing about, New Japan, when I do watch it, is sometimes that is the danger. It's almost like too much of a good thing. You get these guys that have, like 14-star matches, right? And then every match winds up being the same thing, where it's like you've got this like 3 or 4 inner circle of guys, and they throw them at each other, and they have these incredible 45-minute matches where they kick out of 28,000 finishers, and nobody sells anything, and it just keeps going and going and going. And I think even that can get very stale. You've got to keep things shaken up and keep things moving. And I'm glad to see them do something like this to sort of like inject some new blood. And they've been doing it. This isn't like, something new, but it's smart on their part to just keep those wheels turning.
Yeah, I mean, for years it was just kind of, hot potato between Okada and Tanahashi and a few others, Omega for a while with the title. But you just think in the last year, I guess, you've seen so many people wear that, maybe too many people wear that title between Kota Ibushi. Evil had a quick run with it, then Ospreay, and now Shingo. The one part that always gets me a little bit uneasy is, the more the time passes and the more they seem to be getting out of just being in the Okada business. And on one hand, I get it, as you just touched on. I mean, you do have to sort of diversify and create more of a mix at the top. But to me, he is such a kind of generational talent. He's not just like a really good worker or the best worker in the company. He is that shooting star, one in a million. And, I don't know how much of this is his own doing. I know he's had some health issues. He just headlined, so it's not that he's like a mid-carder. But every year or every title change that passes and he's not part of it, I do worry a little bit about him being put on the back burner too much, especially now that he gets into his mid-30s. I'm reminded a little bit of, it's happened a few different places, but just having watched the Ultimate Warrior documentary, they took the title off Hulk Hogan because they felt, let's put it on the Warrior, let's try the new guy. And the realization before long was there's still plenty of gas left in Hulk Hogan and Hulkamania, and this was premature. And sometimes I wonder if that might be happening in New Japan when you still have Okada on the roster. I don't know. I mean, I guess you go back to him any time, but I worry a little about them getting too far away from that.
And it makes for new matches too, though, even with established people like him. It gives him new opponents. It doesn't necessarily mean it's completely passing the torch, right, where he's just some over the hill, washed up guy. But it changes things up, and it makes for new possibilities and things. And that's a good thing. It doesn't mean you have to phase out that older guard. Maybe some of them, but not all of them.
Yeah. While I'm reminded about it, just to tie a bow on the conversation we had last time about these documentaries, I got to see both the Ultimate Warrior documentaries, and I'm always happy to talk about the Ultimate Warrior. Did you see both of them?
I did. Yes, I
Yeah.
did.
The surprising thing for me was, I think we talked about it here, was the expectation was that the A&E one would be a lot more kind of gleaming over some ugly parts of his history, the more kind of polished presentation, and the Vice one would be more raw and honest. And I actually thought the A&E one was surprisingly honest and thorough and deep and not sort of apologetic at all. And I got to say, I thought the Vice one was maybe the worst one I've ever seen them do, kind of the laziest one I ever saw them do. So really disappointed in what Vice did. And I thought the A&E one, I thought they hit a home run. I thought it was terrific.
I liked them both. I thought they complemented each other. They weren't as vastly different as I thought they were going to be, but I will say that I feel like yes, the A&E one was surprisingly honest, but there's two things about it. I think the Vice one was more directly critical, like outright critical, where you had people really airing their very negative opinions of him in a way that you didn't get in the A&E. When the A&E one was more like, we're going to give you the facts of what happened, and we'll let you decide what a jerk this guy was. Whereas the Vice one was, we're going to tell you how awful he was directly. And I respect the opinions of everybody involved, but the fact is, the views of the people that were in there, like Jim Ross and Cornette and people like that, were very commonly held views. It wasn't like they were outliers or anything like that. I mean, he was the classic example of somebody with no respect for the business, very limited ability, whose strengths were played to and were given a responsibility that he could not handle. And in all of the years of people that I've interacted with, he is the one guy that I have never come across anyone in the business who had positive things to say about him. He's kind of like the anti-Mick Foley, which I thought it was so fascinating that I watched the two of theirs back to back, and that was jarring because it was like these guys, I couldn't imagine two more completely opposite people, not first of all as performers and then as human beings, like the two complete opposite ends of the spectrum. The weird thing to me about the Warrior, and even the fact that he gets included in things like this, and where, for example, there was no Hogan one, it's fascinating to me that, and yes, I grew up in that generation. I think we're of similar ages, and I get it. But if you look at this from perspective, this of today, this is a guy who he had a 4, maybe 5-year run at the top, and then he was gone. But because it happened when it happened, at this time when WWF was ubiquitous and an entire generation of little boys that idolized him, he was a superhero come to life. He is lionized in a way that I don't think he really fully deserves. He's put in these greatest of all time discussions and things, which I think is like, to me, it's like putting Goldberg in those discussions. And I liked Goldberg. I probably thought, to me, Goldberg was even more entertaining, even though I don't think he got over quite as big as the Warrior did over time. But I think the two of them, it's like, well, wait a minute. They had a couple of good years, and then that was it. But it's the timing of when it happened. It's the age group. It's the nostalgia of it. But I think for anybody that didn't grow up with that is probably scratching their heads, especially somebody that's looking at it historically and going, why is everybody talking about this guy in the same breath as all these other people? It's baffling to me. I just never felt that he deserved it. If anything, he actually made people miss Hogan, which is no mean feat because people were tired of Hogan. And he made Hogan, by contrast, not look like somebody. I think Hogan was a very talented guy, but he was made to look even more talented in contrast to the Warrior. It was almost like, well, could we please get Hogan back? I mean, at least that guy, had some like respect for the business and had some kind of like knowledge of how to work and psychology and how to do promos. And he made Hogan look like Flair. I guess that's the best way to put it. I'm sorry, I know I'm burying the Ultimate Warrior here, but but I think
Seems
that
to be defend him, yeah.
I think the A&E one was, it was honest, but in a way it was also kind to him by not really having those overly critical voices.
So here's where I disagree on that. And people know I was a big fan of The Ultimate Warrior, but also would never defend him as a person. I have no reason to believe anything other than he was a jerk, by all accounts, right? And the little bit of dealing I had with him, I got to spend a little time with him back in 2008, and he was kind of a jerk to me. So I wouldn't defend him on that side. That said, I feel like the story of essentially what they did in the self-destruction of the Ultimate Warrior, line up a bunch of people and get them to trash the Ultimate Warrior, is kind of lazy. It's just he sucked. He was sloppy in the ring. He didn't take care of. That's fine. That story's out there. I feel like people know it. I don't think you're breaking any new ground saying that. I mean, dragging out Jim Cornette and Jim Ross, and again, it's no beef against any of them. They were being honest, as they called it, and that's fine. But there's no context there. I think what A&E was able to do that I've never seen anyone do before is give you the why, right? And to me that was the best part of it. And talking about his childhood and seeing those images of this dorky kid with big hair and a big nose and big buck teeth and clearly some real insecurity, and his dad leaving at a young age. And all that said, the Warrior never used that as an excuse for being a jerk. I think it's other people saying, well, here's the context of why he was like that a little. He was a jerk, but here's why he ended up that way. And beyond that, his wife, his second wife, explaining, I thought just the little bit they talked about how he went down like this dark hole of conservative talk radio was fascinating to me, because that's such a real thing. I think a lot of people have seen people, do that in their own lives. And, the picture I got was of his wife being disappointed in him, and basically saying that the real Warrior, the real Jim, the man that I saw at home with his daughters, when the lights weren't on, when he didn't feel this need to put on this image of being so tough and no nonsense, you saw softness. They showed his wife and kids reuniting with an artist friend of his, and they never said as much, but that came right after the whole bit about him saying this really awful homophobic stuff in these speeches. And then they show, here's one of his closest friends who was an artist, and a very kind of flamboyant artist. They never said outright what that's about, but the point was, in his real life, he wasn't nearly as close-minded as he tried to show the world that he was. And I thought, and none of it is an apology, none of it is an excuse for the awful, terrible stuff he said, a lot of which was not covered in either documentary. But I thought you got a more holistic, full picture of who Jim Hellwig, the man, was in the A&E one. It was also twice as long than the Vice one, which was just a lot of people trashing him. And really, more than anything, was the story of his first marriage, which wasn't all that interesting, and I thought Sherry, his first wife, was really good and really likable and very honest and really wasn't trashing him. But like the big reveal there was like he cheated on her. And, that's terrible, but that doesn't make like the most outrageous kind of expose.
I also think that Dana Warrior's reaction to it was a little over the top, where I don't know if you saw, she was calling the Dark Side documentary smut and garbage, and nobody.
I just thought it was just kind of lazy, boring, paint by numbers. I think they thought it was a good get, and it was a good get to get his first wife, and I think she gave a lot of insight. And she, the best part of that documentary, I thought, was her talking about the last time she saw him and how they kind of made peace. And again, it was the only bit of, I thought, the documentary that made him seem like a real person, and how he talked about how he regretted ever hurting her and apologized to her. And wished her well, and they kind of went their separate ways, and that was the last you saw him. And I thought that was kind of like a nice moment. My disappointment in the Vice one was that it didn't even go. If you're going to trash the guy, then bring out the evidence. And there wasn't that much. I mean, it was, again, Jim Cornette and Jim Ross saying that he was lazy and sloppy, but I thought in some ways they didn't dig deep enough. It was just kind of very boring paint by the numbers. And I thought the A&E one, for the first time ever in anything I've seen, books, stories, DVDs, shoot interviews, gave the picture of a fully formed picture of a real human being. And I also think, this is where I will defend him a little bit. I think the stuff about him being and not being in the ring with him, obviously, take that for what it's worth. I mean, anybody who was hurt by him absolutely has a right to say that he was a terrible worker. But I could give you pretty easily, I could rattle off, half a dozen Ultimate Warrior matches that were good, if not really, really, really good. That has everything to do with who he was in there with. I mean, he was not having a good match with a bad worker. But I think the narrative of him just being absolute garbage, El Gigante level in the ring is way, way, way exaggerated. And I think this was one part where I very much disagreed with the Vice stuff. People saying that his promos were terrible. They're just, I mean, if you don't like him, don't like him. But you're nuts. His promos were fantastic. They were so insane and crazy and out of this world, and nobody was doing anything like him. And that's, I'll never defend Ultimate Warrior, the wrestler, as being a good wrestler, because I don't think he was. Again, I think it's overblown how bad he was, and I certainly wouldn't defend the person who, by all accounts, was just a jerk a lot of the time. Again, including to me. But in the history of wrestling, I'll put the Undertaker at the top in terms of gimmicks, but I think the Ultimate Warrior is right there. I think he was right near the top in terms of an exciting, colorful, completely unique character, and that's why he got the mileage that he did over a relatively short run, because he was truly unique. He you didn't see anything like him. People will say, the comparisons, whether it's Goldberg or insert your muscled up, painted up guy. The Warrior was something different.
All right. Well, I'm trying to remember whatever else I wanted to respond to that. I think it's been about a half hour, but I'll do my best. I know you'll. I think there's some truth to what you say. I mean, for me, I would agree with some of what you're saying. I think this was said by somebody in one of the two, and I really related to this. He was a moment in time. He really represented a moment in time. He wasn't one of those guys that had this really long career where you build up this goodwill and everything. He was a moment in time that might be hard to explain to people that weren't around then. I also think we can never forget he was aimed at us. He was aimed at little boys. And there had never been, I mean, Hogan was to a certain degree aimed at kids, but even Hogan had a wider appeal. I think that may have been the Ultimate Warrior's weakest point, is he really was for only, in my opinion, little boys, little kids, but mainly little boys. That was the target audience. And those people are always going to love him. Like, his promos were great if you were a little boy. If you weren't, they were horrendous. You had to be a little boy to think this is the coolest thing ever. And I get it, because I was a little boy too. But if you're watching that, let's say in 1991, you're 21 years old. I don't think you're enjoying those promos. I think you're
enjoying WWF. I don't think you're enjoying almost anything that they were doing at the time.
And I think that the thing with, so Dark Side of the Ring, we have to accept they are Dark Side of the Ring, right? That's what they do. That's why it's called Dark Side of the Ring. So they're going to dwell, right? You're right, on that negative stuff. That's they're a little tabloidy. I think they do it very well. That's their thing. The A&E ones are a little more kind of like upbeat, a little more like positive, or more kind of like life affirming, let's just say. That's the vibe you get from most of them, that Savage one notwithstanding. I think this with the Warrior one, I think there was a lot of that. Not that it was, I don't think it was a puff piece. I do think, like Dark Side of the Ring would not have had ever people like, Pete Rosenberg and Sam Roberts, who are like that perfect demographic, like gushing about being 6 years old and watching the Ultimate Warrior run to the ring, right? They're not going to have that on Dark Side of the Ring. Those are the people that are going to love him no matter what. I also think I think that Dana Warrior was let off the hook on a lot of things. Like, I'm watching her and she's saying things like, well, I had no idea he was going to say those things at UConn, and that was a surprise, and that was one time only. And then they're showing you how he was writing stuff like that on his blog for the longest time. And you can't tell me, look, that she was his wife. They were in the house. They lived together. He's watching Fox News all the time, the unnamed network that she's not going to say he had on all the time. You're going to tell me that this was a shock to her, that he was saying things like that? He wasn't saying things like that around the house all the time. I didn't live there. I wasn't in that house. I would bet a lot of money that she heard stuff like that a lot.
I don't know, because when you meet people like this, and I know people in my own life, and especially a dad at home with his wife and 2 young daughters, maybe living kind of very a remote life, not a lot of human interaction. It's easy to, and this is whatever, 15 years ago, record your video and put it up online when you're trashing everyone. The same stuff that people get grief about today. It in a roundabout way, it's the same thing that people like the Warrior would criticize as kind of the keyboard warriors, that kind of thing, right? And the reality of that is that very often in real human interactions, those people are puppies. They're perfectly nice, and that's more the real them than the put on them. And none of this is letting him off the hook for the awful things that he said and wanted to be known as saying. It's not just that he said them; he wanted to be known as the guy who said awful things about gays and took joy in Bobby Heenan dying of cancer. Just terrible things. And again, no excuses for them. But I could also believe that the Ultimate Warrior that his 2 daughters knew as dad, and that Dana Warrior knew, was a completely different person. Anyhow, we got to wrap up here. It was a lot of fun. Always jump at the opportunity to talk about the Ultimate Warrior. So this was a good one. Brian, thanks so much.
Thank you.
And
I hope I didn't hit a nerve too much there, Al. I hope we can still be friends. I really like you a lot.
Stay tuned for the next episode with a brand new co-host. See what Dan Murphy is doing these days.
You love Bruce Pritchard.
All right, Brian. We'll do it again soon. Thanks, buddy.
Want to thank Brian once again for the conversation and for putting me in my place. Honestly, listening back on it, we weren't even that far apart. So, but clearly, I'm more of an Ultimate Warrior fan than he was, I guess. Anyhow, now moving on to my conversation with the subject of the hot seat interview in the latest issue of Pro Wrestling Illustrated. You can pick it up at pwi-online.com. Here's just a taste of it. You can read the whole interview there inside the issue. Here is the AEW and Impact and AAA heavyweight champion, the Cleaner, Kenny Omega. And you're challenging for the Impact World title this weekend. You've already picked up title in AAA. We've seen relationships with the NWA, with New Japan. What's your vision for how far this can go? I mean, do you envision a world where all these doors are open and, is it possible that we see a WWE versus AEW a match, or are there limits to how far this could go?
I think, there'll always be limits. There'll always be, maybe lines that you cannot cross. But I believe that there is a world in, right place, right time, when you could see every company working together. And I don't necessarily mean every company. I just mean if a company wanted to work with another company, I think they would be open to the idea. And I think, again, this is a terrible thing to say. But one of the reasons why the Forbidden Door, quote unquote, was opened with New Japan, it was partly due to, what we're all struggling with right now, which is a pandemic. And for us to take a step back and stop worrying about our own stuff and see what kind of world we're all living in, same world, and how we need to set aside petty differences, how we need to set aside just age-old tropes of this is my company and my territory, and stay the heck out. There's no way we could ever play nice or cross paths. I think it was great that now people are realizing we're all struggling in the same way. We're all facing the same hardships. This is the same planet, and a lot of us are sharing the same fans. So why not make the world a bit of a better place as best as we can for what we do, which is something very minor in the grand scheme of things, which is just professional wrestling. We're not as important as a lot of us think that we are. But if we can contribute in some kind of positive way with what we do and what we're good at, I think we need to take the motion to do it. That's always been my approach.
Are you anxious to get back to wrestling in front of fans and beyond what you've been doing in Jacksonville over the last year?
Yeah, I mean, again, this experience with in front of no fans and in empty arenas or in front of like kind of we've had wrestlers kind of recreate sort of a very intimate fan base. It's been unique. And again, I'm all for learning new things and increasing my skill set the best that I can, or just having experiences. So it was interesting, and I learned a lot by having to perform in front of nobody. You really have to change the way that you do perform. I learned a lot by watching matches in front of no people. And I've learned a lot by performing in matches in front of no people. And I've learned that it's not the same thing. You can't perform the same way that you do in front of no people that you would in front of a crowd. And I believe, again, it's just my opinion, but I believe it's inexcusable to approach the two beasts in the same way. They're very different animals. So if you go into a match, which may be great in front of a live audience, to have that sort of a match in front of an audience may not necessarily be representative of the kind of energy or the kind of reaction, or it may not be the most accurate representation of the match that's actually being practiced in front of the camera. So you need to make sure that the energy that may have been supplemented by the live crowd, you need to now double down on your energy in the ring. You and your opponent have to double down on the energy that you put forward, because that's all they can see, that's all they can hear. It's a lot more tiring of an experience to have to not only do your match, act, react, but also give that extra energy that otherwise may not be there, because you don't have 4, 5, 10 plus thousand fans reacting and screaming and giving that extra stimuli. Again, completely different skill. Glad I learned it. Will it be like, is it going to be something that will be necessary later on down the road? Maybe not, but you never know. You really don't. But again, I just try to take it in stride and, again, add that skill to my tool chest.
Yeah. Is it tough? I not to bring WWE that much into it, but they've had it even harder in some ways than you guys, because they've truly been in front of no fans, where you guys have had at least a smattering of fans. But when you're trying to get a storyline, a character over, and obviously your characters have a big arch over the last few months, is it tough kind of flying blind and not getting that reaction from fans and not really being sure, is this working or not?
Yeah, it's very difficult. It's tough to know it's tough to know when something's actually hit home or if something was a home run or not. It's difficult to judge even by numbers. You can't look at ratings and say that, okay, this was a hit, because they're not going to fluctuate that much. And not only that, but the ratings that we monitor it's just one type of rating in one country. When I'm thinking way more outside the box than that, I would love for us to be more of an international, worldwide recognized brand. So I want what I do to be appreciated, not just in America. I care about how people in Canada look at it, how people in the UK look at it, how people in Japan look at it, in Mexico. There are certain things, types of stories, types of matches, types of everything where it may be honed in on one type of culture and one type of person. So if that person is pleased with what you've done, great. But if you look big picture, how is everyone else looking at it? It's again, I feel like I'm proud of my recent work, and I'm just doing the best that I can, but it's so hard based on the little that we know from the current world state. Who knows? Who really knows?
Yeah.
It's all unknown. It's a mystery.
Yeah. You touched on ratings. I know we're nearing the end of our time here, so I want to get this in. Feel free to take as long as you want to answer.
Okay. Yeah.
But so much has been made of the ratings. I think it probably means more to folks like us on this side of the business than you guys. But the Wednesday night wars, as they were, and now NXT moving to Tuesday night. Is that something that is a point of pride for you and the rest of AEW? Is it something you celebrate? Is it just the removal of a distraction? Are you just happy that NXT moving gives you a few more eyeballs on Wednesday night, or how much of it is like the celebration of a victory? We won this.
For me, and I'm sure people in my company will be reading this or hearing this, and that's fine. This is my true, honest feeling. I never felt one way or another towards the war. If you could call it that, I wouldn't call it that. Again, I knew that we would tell different stories in our company. I knew that we would show different types of matches in our company. I can only control what I have a hand in. And that would be, my stuff and just a variety of other things that may or may not be on the show. And I'm sure the Bucks feel the same way. But for NXT to have moved to Tuesday, I mean, sure, great. I just feel like now it's never. I never felt like it was a battle for Wednesday. I feel like it's a battle across the board. There's so much wrestling every day during the week, and I try to think back when I was a fan, and I thought I was like a mega fan when I was watching wrestling, but not doing it. And even still, I think at the height of my fandom, I couldn't watch the amount of wrestling that is available to us today. I couldn't do it 5, 6, 7 days a week. I just couldn't do it. So for me, the real war is, how do you get the eyeballs for your day of the week? You know what I mean? So we're not battling for Wednesday. I feel like I'm battling for the week. You know what I mean? Right. And the thing is, like, there are so many great wrestlers doing it, and there is no one roster on the planet that has all of the greatest athletes and talent. There doesn't exist. There's always going to be one or two guys somewhere else that could fit in and put in great work anywhere. So it's just, how do you be different enough, or how can you sort of get those eyes on your product by doing something different than what everyone else is doing in that week. And that's sort of been the name of the game for me. Yeah. So the Wednesday night thing, like I love a lot of those NXT guys. A lot of them are my friends. You know what I mean? I love to see them doing well. I love to see them. I love it when I hear that they have a great match or great performance. It's great.
Do you encourage people to go watch NXT? I mean, now that they're on a different night, do you tell fans, yeah, go check out NXT on Tuesday nights on USA?
I mean, like, I guess if I heard the card in advance and I knew, and it's two other guys, like, for example, like if there was I'm a big fan of Adam Cole, big fan of Kyle O'Reilly. If I knew they're going to have a great match and it was going to be on the Tuesday, I'd be like, hey, maybe that's something worth checking out, guys. You know what I mean? So, and for me, like, there's a lot of people that I don't really know. So I also like brushing up on the new faces. But I mean, again, like I said, like whether it be Raw, SmackDown, Impact, Ring of Honor, AEW, NXT, New Japan, AAA, CMLL, Stardom, whatever, there's so many streaming services available at all varieties of times. And I think all we can do is, as AEW, of course, is to whatever it is that we advertise, whatever it is that we set out on doing, whether it be a tag match, a singles match, some kind of stipulation match, whether it be with our special guests coming in to do whatever. We need to maximize that opportunity to make it the most entertaining amount of time on the show as possible. We just can't take it for granted. We can't be complacent because we want to stick around for a while. We want to have this company for a while. We want TNT to be happy with us and to keep us on board. So I feel it's almost like we're not competing against, in a way we are competing against other companies, but we're also competing where I'm more just trying to attract viewers. And the best case scenario, I'm not trying to steal viewers that are watching another product. I want brand new viewers that watch what we do and say, hey, this was pretty fun or funny or dramatic or whatever. And they tell a friend, and then they tell a friend. And then now we have these new viewers who are watching what we do and enjoying our product. So absolutely, I'm not competing to steal wrestling fans from other companies because a lot of them watch everything anyway. I just want for those fans to enjoy our product because they really are, they're the backbone of all of wrestling right now. They've kept all of us afloat. But there's also there's a huge importance for me anyway, to attract the new fan, people that haven't watched anything, and make them fans of AEW.
Yeah. I'll wrap it up here, but on that point, it just struck me that's a lot of pressure, right? I mean, the world champion, the first world champion, I believe, right, that doesn't have recognition outside of AEW. You don't have that WWE resume that Moxley or Jericho had, and your role in the office there, and you're doing real well, right? I mean, TNT's got to be thrilled with when you guys like the number 2 rated cable show last week. Is that it goes beyond the pressure you had just as a talent in the past, right? I mean, that's a lot.
Absolutely, it is. Yeah, no, I mean, there's certainly a lot of pressure in that regard. But again, I feel like if the people around me, my sort of trust system, my support system around me, is honest with me and tells me, hey, I think you really killed it tonight and what you did was really entertaining, then it kind of puts my mind at ease a little bit. And I feel that maybe people watching at home or people that are going to watch whatever, even if they DVR'd it or whatever, that they're going to watch it and take some kind of enjoyment out of it as well. We are our own worst critics. So it's tough for me to watch my own stuff. It's tough for me to really think that I've done a fantastic job because I always look to the things that I could have done better. Or things I didn't maybe like at all. Yep. But I just knowing what types of television programs are pulling in those types of ratings, the types of television programs that are beloved, and some of the television programs that are after long being canceled, you kind of see that there's a group of people that were absolutely in love with the show and are torn apart that they're gone. I mean, it's hard to strike that balance of like, how do you attract the masses, but also how do you pull in those people that are maybe looking for something very specific or unique that they're not getting, that they're not fulfilling in other types of programming. And I feel that maybe what I do falls kind of out of line with typical professional wrestling. So I'm hoping that I can target new types of fans or strike chords with people differently than what they're used to seeing. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah. Well, I think you're doing a great job of it, and look forward
Thank you.
to what's next. Going to certainly be watching Rebellion to see what happened there.
That's right. Yeah, coming up.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much, Kenny. It was a real pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time. Try to keep it at least under 40 minutes here. Already went above our time.
Oh, that's all good. I'm humble.
Super appreciate you doing this with us.
You bet, man. Thank you so much.